There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome to my channel, and this is the mid-year book freakout tag for 2022. It's my 5th year doing this tag. All my previous ones, should you be interested, are listed in the show notes. And this is actually in lieu of a Friday Reads. Those of you that are tuning in expecting a Friday Reads today from me, I didn't finish anything, so I thought I'd do this instead. Those of you that are here specifically and exclusively for the mid-year book freakout tag, I am going to share some personal news. There are timestamps. You can jump over my personal news if you're not the slightest bit interested in me as a person and go directly to the tag. So first off, this is my new blouse, which I don't think you can see. I better go around here. There you go. I think it's pretty. I might be fighting with the sun a little bit. I see it keeps threatening. It's kind of poking its head through the clouds there, but lights up the background rather nicely, but it kind of washes me out, doesn't it? Well, I think I'm going to stand for this. That way I'll be uncharacteristically brief, perhaps, but I'm not even sure if I like this, because that sun is just, and this is the least sunny bench in this park. I think that I need to be out a lot earlier in the morning. It's about 7:20 a.m. and I can't see another spot that I can, well, I might as well share my trials and tribulations. So after carting my suitcase from Tokyo to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, my tripod, the top of the tripod, the thing that hooks you put the iPad on, the mount, broke just as I was about to do a bite-sized chat with that lovely person from Australia that I didn't know. I was pretty flustered for my chat with her, but I do have this plastic gooseneck thing, the bendable one that you need to clamp it. But the park benches here, there's only about 4 different places that see there, the sun is cooperating. Okay, so my personal news is my blouse, which I love, and I found an apartment. My father is 86 years old and still leads a very active life, and certainly he's sharp as a tack. And he found a listing for this 2-bedroom apartment. But I thought, looking at it on the Google map, that it was too far from the main drag where I wanted to be. It would be too far from a supermarket, too far from this, too far from that. So I kind of poo-pooed it. But it was definitely a more luxurious apartment, more modern, more of a, the ones that I was looking at, the ones that were really close to 8th Street. I don't mind naming the big street that I wanted to be close to. The apartments that were a block from 8th Street were older, 2-story walk-ups with no elevator and just a little bit more. Well, one of them we saw was really run down and the other one was actually quite nice. But Mom finally convinced me by driving me over to the one that Dad had found, and it was actually only maybe 2 blocks from 8th Street. Much nicer, more kind of a modern feel. It had just better security, everything. Phoned the guy, went and looked at it, just fell in love with it. So we've rented it. And I can move in on July 1st. So very excited about that. And it is more expensive, but still no more expensive than Kenji and I were paying in Tokyo, with a lot more space and amenities. So for example, Wi-Fi is included. It's the only apartment. Good morning. Most apartments don't include Wi-Fi, so that was included. Washer dryer en suite, which I love the idea of. The balcony, I could have a party for 7. In other words, I could have all my Sean the Book Maniac subscribers on the balcony very comfortably. And people have barbecues on the balconies. I might do some of that. And lots of storage space in the apartment. The bedrooms are a decent size, but not as big as some of the other apartments we looked at. But the entire apartment is a really great size. And air conditioning is included. It's on the 2nd floor, so I'm gonna have to walk a flight of stairs every time I leave and come back to the apartment, but that's the same as it was in Tokyo, and that's enough exercise for me. And with no elevator. 2 stories is too much for me with my poor lungs, but 1 story, that's just about the right amount. We'll be going around to garage sales. My sister has a few boxes of kitchen stuff and whatnot that she's happy to give to me if I want. So we're gonna go look at those tomorrow and do some garage sales. So if this video doesn't go up on Friday, you know why. I got carried away shopping for stuff. I guess the only other news is that if any of you are technical peasants like me to do with Wi-Fi, here is the tip that I learned. I got the suggestion and the equipment I needed from the lovely SaskTel lady, that if I want to make my Zoom calls perfect, plug an Ethernet cable from my iPad or my laptop or whatever device one is using. Plug an Ethernet cable directly from your device into the modem, and it's just 100 times better. I started teaching on Zoom my classes and to my students back in Tokyo, and they were overjoyed at how great the Wi-Fi connection was. One of them said it was even better than when I was in Tokyo, and another one said, "Sean, are you sure you're not still in Tokyo?" So yes, Ethernet cable is the way to go. Probably 80% of you already knew that, but yes, if you're fighting with Zoom for any reason, the Ethernet cables are either free. My SaskTel lady, she just handed me one for free, or dirt cheap online or whatever, wherever, and you'll be in business. All right, now let's start the tag. And I am feeling a little bit self-conscious because there's a young man sitting on the bench right across from me. He's not that close to me, but and I don't know if he's staring at me. It seems like he's staring at me because he's looking my way. But anyway, I think it'll all be okay. So without further ado, here is the mid-year book freakout tag for 2022. This was originally created by a booktuber called IsThatChami or Kami. That original video is gone. That channel is gone from BookTube, so I can't link to it. And I wasn't tagged this year, and I don't care to be tagged, and I'm not going to worry about tagging people. It's barely a tag, really. It's an institutional annual video that so many booktubers love to do. You don't need to be tagged for this video at all. It's not that kind of a video. So you are tagged. Elias. Number 1, best book you have read so far this year. I actually think that probably my book of the year, I have yet to read. Doing this mid-year book freakout tag, if it is a tag, this year has been really interesting because I have read far less than half of what I typically have read by mid-year because I've been so busy moving. But I have a couple that I've absolutely loved, and that one of them may be my top read of the year. But I also feel like it's entirely possible, more likely than usual, that my top read of the year is in the future. But the two that I absolutely loved and couldn't pick between, one is an Irish novella called Foster by Claire Keegan. I don't know when it was published, but maybe about a decade ago. I read it after reading her new one, Small Things Like These. It was a 2021 release, and it's it's the perfect book to read at Christmas. I don't believe in seasonal reading. I think it's kind of disgusting, but this one I did read around the Christmas season and absolutely loved it. So then I followed up with her penultimate novella, if I'm remembering her publication history correctly, Foster, which is about I guess it's about a foster child, but the father drops his, how old would she be, 10 or 11 maybe? I'm terrible with children's ages because I think of all people as the exact same age as me, even children, and that's how I relate to them. I think that's why children like me. And I also think that I'm about 12 years old, so yeah. Anyway, Sean, get to the point. She's dropped off by her father I thought they were distant relatives, but apparently maybe not. I have to reread the book because that detail has kind of confused me. But she stays with this family who had lost a son a few years before, and it's a really warm relationship, very quirky and really warm relationship she establishes with this pair that I thought were distant cousins or something, but maybe not, before she's taken back at the end of the summer or whatever. And it's just, the writing is gorgeous. The characters are just so full-bodied, and I mean, she just does so much in I think it's like an 80-page novella. I was reading it as an ebook, so I'm not sure. Just incredible. And that is a tie with Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread, a Nigerian-Canadian novel by Francesca Ekwuyasi. And I read it over a luxurious 3 or 4 or 5 months. Not 5 months, well, 3 or 4 months anyway, this year. I love the characters so much. It was a really interesting take on the Igbo concept of Obanji, which are spirits who don't want themselves to stay alive in a human form and are constantly bombarding the human being they are inhabiting to somehow die. And it goes back to Igbo cosmology or theology about twins and stuff. And I'm not an expert on it, but it's an interesting pairing to read with Akwaeke Emezi's novel from about 4 or 5 years ago, Freshwater, which I absolutely loved. And the mother in this story is also Obanji, and she has twin daughters, and they are estranged for many years as adults, but the estrangement happened, I believe, when they were in their teens, perhaps. And I loved the characters so much, and it was, as you can tell by the title, it was very much of a food novel. And is that sun washing me out? I think we're just going to stick with it and keep going here. It was a sexy novel. It was the most successfully sexy novel I have read maybe ever, in the way that sexuality and the playful eroticism is woven into the plot, woven into the characters' lives, such that it would have been not nearly as good of a book had that been absent. And I don't usually have that feeling about the sexual parts of literary fiction. I think it's usually too much or not necessary. In this case, it was just central to the story, central to the characters, and that was amazing. And it was also very much about food, which is a central thing. So the sensuality of cooking and the sensuality of eating, just gorgeous. It was a powerhouse of a novel. Okay, there, he's walking away. I will feel much less self-conscious from now on. Best sequel you've read so far this year. I haven't read any sequels, and literary fiction doesn't usually have sequels, but of course it does. So, for example, last year I read the entire Alexandria Quartet by Lawrence Durrell. So yes, I do read sequels on occasion, and one that I'm looking forward to reading, I don't know if I'll get to it this year, but I would love to get to it this year, is the second volume of the Cairo Trilogy by Naguib Mahfouz. I read Palace Walk last year as an audio text combo. I don't remember the audio narrator, but he was fantastic. It is translated by William M. Hutchins and Olive E. Kenny, and I presume that they did the subsequent volumes, but I don't know that for sure. The second in the trilogy is Palace of Desire. I don't have a copy. I will get a copy, and can't wait to read it. I don't think it's available as audio, so I might actually, if I knew it was coming later, I would wait for it. Number 3, a new release you haven't read yet from this year but want to. This will also be a little bit of a book haul because I just bought this book. It's the second book I bought in Saskatoon after moving here, May 28th. It was on my most anticipated releases. It's a memoir called Boys in Oil by Taylor Brorby. And the subtitle is Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land. And he is an essayist and poet. I think he now is a prof at the University of Utah, but he grew up in North Dakota. So he was a rural guy that became gay, and he fled his home state in order to live a gay life. And it is also about oil in North Dakota and fracking, I think, and I don't know actually, but it's an environmental memoir. So I am interested in gay memoir. I'm especially interested in rural gay memoirs, and now that I've moved back to Canada especially, I need to bone up on oil. Is it completely evil? I think so. And this, for all of those reasons, is one I'm very much looking forward to reading. I believe the publication date in North America was just in June. So, number 4, most anticipated release for the second half of 2022. I couldn't choose between these two. The new Anthony Marra coming out, I think August in Canada anyway. Mercury Pictures presents. So he's going from Chechnya, where his first 2 books were set, more or less, or Russia, Chechnya, to America, to the film, the heyday of the film. I'm not sure, the heyday, the golden years of Hollywood, I'm not sure, set in the 40s. I don't know the details, but it's set in Hollywood. Mercury Pictures presents. I can't wait for that. And a book of short stories by an indigenous writer from Maine, Night of the Living Rez by Morgan Talty, and I believe it comes out in next month or even later this month. Both of those were on my most anticipated releases, and I'm still anticipating them with great excitement. Number 5, biggest disappointment this year. Because I haven't read much, I don't have so many disappointments. And I think I've only got about 5 bales so far this year. What the heck is up with that? But the 2 biggest disappointments, I have a tie again. The Japanese novel Tokyo Ueno Station by Lieu, translated from the Japanese by Morgan Giles, and I thought it was really bad. It was completely unsuccessful and uninteresting and had a lot of problems with it. Similarly, the Welsh novel Creed by Margiad Evans. This was a particularly bitter disappointment because it was the 3rd novel that I've read by her, and so I now have crossed her off my list as a potential favorite author. Country Dance, her most famous novel, Country Dance, is my favorite Welsh novel and one of the best novellas I've ever read. But her other novel, Turf or Stone, I hated, and I hated Creed as well. Just bad. So she was a one-hit wonder as far as I'm concerned. I will forever recommend Country Dance and say don't bother with any of the other crap she put out. Well, hello there. It's about 3 hours later. That sun just got way too much for me. It was just not going to work, and then by the time I got home at about 8 o'clock in the morning, the Wi-Fi guy was making a second visit this week to help Mom and Dad get everything hooked up, and I don't know what the hell they were doing, but part of it was for my benefit, and he was here for he just left a couple minutes ago, so he was here for three and a half hours, and I couldn't continue making the video until he left. So here I am again. The next one is 6, the biggest surprise this year, and that was an easy choice. I was absolutely delighted by this Indian novel, or novella, I guess, that I bought online on a whim a few years ago, and it sat there. The author was on my Twitter and commenting on my videos, and I was a little intimidated to finally try it because of that, but I ended up absolutely adoring it. It is called Daura, and the author is Anukriti Upadhyay. I was just delighted by how much I loved it. It is set in the furthest outposts of Rajasthan. The main character is the new district collector in town who finds himself drawn deeper and deeper into the lives of the local inhabitants and their myths and folklore and spirituality. And it's a very gripping story. I just inhaled it. I want to reread it and then maybe do a full review, but just magnificently, really had a really sophisticated structure and just such a effervescent way of telling the story, and it just immersed me in Rajasthan mythology and culture and folklore and all that stuff. And it is a companion volume, although I don't think it's an actual sequel to Boundary. They were published at the same time, but I'm quite sure that they are not, other than both being set in Rajasthan, that they it's not a sequel or anything. They do not have the same characters, but I will definitely be getting to Boundary this year because of how much I absolutely adore Daura. So if you're looking for something that matches my blouse, if you're looking for something propulsive, please check it out. Once I've read more by Anukriti, I am going to have her on my channel. I got her 3rd novel recently too. So the next prompt, number 7, is favorite new author, and I'm uncomfortable with these kinds of questions because until I've read at least 2 books by an author, preferably more than 2, I don't know. Is it just a one-hit wonder or not? So the first one, this was my 3rd book by this author, so she is now in the upper echelon, and it qualifies as a favorite writer for me, even though I have been reading her for the last 3 years, I believe. I've read a novella by her every year, and then this year's was an actual novel. The late Japanese novelist Yuko Tsushima, and this year I read the newest to be translated by Geraldine Harcourt, and I loved it even more than the first 2 I've read, and this is the most recent. This was published, I think, in 1980. She wrote scads of novellas and short story collections and novels, and I think there's only about 4 or 5 that have yet been translated, so I will read absolutely everything. Tsushima writes about single mothers, and each story is completely different. She uses the metaphor of light and being illuminated and being radiant in such diverse ways in her fiction, and the photographs are all like this. They show the influence of light on a subject, and as she does in her fiction. And she writes against the grain of Japanese literature, centering people that are ignored otherwise in certainly the literature of her day. There are newer female writers that have taken over where she left off, but she was groundbreaking in centering unwed mothers. I love the sassy provocativeness of that, and then just the gloriousness of the way she develops characters. With an emotional power that is usually completely absent from Japanese fiction. I don't hear many people who love Japanese literature talk about how emotionally satisfying they were. They get other things out of it. For me, the number one thing I want out of my literature is emotionally satisfying characters and stories, and Yuko Tsushima delivers. Tsushima is definitely a favorite writer. This third book that I read by her clinched it. I have one that's now in the running to be considered a new favorite author, but I've only read this one short little novel, and that was Touch and Go by Elizabeth Berridge, who was a little known, underappreciated English novelist and short story writer who died. When did she die? She died in 2009, and she was maybe in her 80s, and I really loved Touch and Go. I have a full review, but I'm not quite ready to say she's a new favorite until I've read at least one more, preferably two. So stay tuned. Number 8, newest fictional crush. And this is the second year running where I haven't had one. I do sometimes have them. I do get crushes on my characters. None have passed the muster this year so far. And number 9 is new favorite character, and I have two. It's a tie. One is Takiko, the protagonist of Yuko Tsushima's Woman Running in the Mountains. She was this real independent-minded single mother. Like, she wasn't high school age, she was 20, but she had a determination and a grit and a defiance of her parents, and she grew up in a very abusive home environment, and in fact stayed living there for the duration of the novel, but chose her own path once she discovered she was pregnant, and didn't let anybody else control her. And she had a really beautiful imagination, which is rendered so powerfully in the novel. I loved Takiko. And my other favorite character is one of the main characters in Butter, Honey, Peg, Bread by Francesca Ekwuyasi. And there was a set of twins, adult characters that were twins, and I had to look it up because I'd never heard anybody say the characters' names out loud. So I didn't know how it was pronounced, but I listened to quite a few minutes of interviews with the author to find out how she pronounced Taye. She was the queer twin. I absolutely loved her. I loved the way her character jumped off the page. And as I said earlier in this video, it was a very sensual, very sexual novel, and she was the really sexual character, and I loved her sex life. I loved the way she moved through the world with this erotic thrum to her that it sometimes screwed her up, but most of the time brought so much joy to her life. And it was such a sex-positive novel, and she was such a deeply sexual person. If I was just a little bit more of a lesbian, she would have been my fictional crush, but boy, I loved Taye. 10, a book that made you cry this year. I don't cry when I read, but I get a little verklempt or something, and that's about as much as ever has happened to me while reading, or pretty much for any other situation. The two would be the debut novel by Carter Sickles, The Evening Hour. It was extremely moving, and especially at the end, but throughout it, the characters were rendered, just like in Carter Sickles' second novel, The Prettiest Star. The Evening Hour was an extremely emotionally powerful novel. I loved it. It did get me all teared up more than once. The other one is a work of poetry by a Ukrainian-American poet, so there's probably only one that would come to the mind of most of you, and that's Ilya Kaminsky, his collection Deaf Republic, which I read in the early days and weeks of the war crime that Putin is perpetrating in Ukraine, and it was just really resonant with the feelings that the news was triggering in me, and it was just a beautiful, I don't read poetry, I read it from cover to cover in a few short days, and it really packed wallop. I am not somebody who knows how to talk about poetry, but that collection just obliterated me. 11, a book that made you happy this year. Well, for the first 4 years that I did this tag, I'd throw a tantrum because who the fuck reads books to be happy? It's disgusting. But some people do, and I think occasionally my primary reaction to a book that I was reading might be happiness, but I certainly haven't read any so far this year. But I'm not going to throw a little hissy fit, because if you want to read genre fiction or something that has a nice happy ending or something, please suit yourself. A happy ending is usually a bad book for me, but there's other ways to be happy with what I read. I do not have a book that twigs with that prompt again this year, but no more temper tantrum. 12, the most beautiful book you've bought or received so far this year. I have two. One is, I read this as an ebook last year, and the first book that I bought after I got to Saskatchewan, got to Saskatoon a few weeks ago, was Nishga by Jordan Abel. I have a full review of this. I loved it, but oh my god, what a beautiful book. Look at this, look at the shape of it. Here it is against a conventional, so it's quite a different shape. There's no dust jacket, it's a bare hardcover, and it is just a gorgeous book. I want to reread it as a book because I think there would be things about it that would hit me in a different way, or even more powerfully than did the ebook, which I absolutely loved. Features his artwork superimposed over photographs. I believe that is Jordan Abel's parents, and often in conjunction with the kind of poetry that he writes that I don't have the vocabulary at this moment to explain, but it is just a gorgeous book. So definitely this one, and I would also add to that the American edition of Young Mongo by Douglas Stewart. My copy, which I read, is in the mail coming to me here in Canada. I don't have it, but here's the cover. I like it far better than the British cover, which I won't bother to show. I didn't hate the British cover, but this American cover, I think perfectly emblematizes the novel. It is Young Mongo, and once you've read the book, you understand how perfect it is. And I just think it's a really striking cover. So those two. The last prompt, except for tagging people, is what do I need to read by the end of the year? Which I think is a silly question. I don't need to read anything by the end of the year, but I did commit last year to reading Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy, and I have started it, but I've got a bare start on it. I'm loving it. I got to really concentrate more on it because I want to finish it this year. It's 1,300 pages, and I think I'm on about page 120 or something. And I also committed, and this was for the Mooks and the Gripes book bucket list tag that I created, to reading East of Eden by John Steinbeck, and I haven't started it. I will get a physical copy probably, and maybe do an audio text combo with that. So that's something that I will start before the end of the summer, I expect. And one more, just because I got so fascinated with this book after I read the opening paragraph or two in a book haul video. That is the novel Khwabnama by Akhteruzzaman Elias, and he is a Bangladeshi novelist. This was translated by Arunava Sinha, and the first page just grabbed me by the throat, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. So this is one of the books that I brought in my suitcase, and I will get to this chunky Bangladeshi novel before the year is out. And so I've got my reading cut out for me, because another one I'm also deeply fascinated by, and this one will be familiar to a bunch of you. I'd be surprised if any of you have heard of Khwabnama. Prove me wrong by leaving a comment, and especially if you've read it, tell me if you think I would like it. Is the Booker International winning novel Tomb of Sand by Getanjali Shri, translated by Daisy Rockwell. I have that one on ebook. I would like to get my hands on a physical copy, but it's easier said than done these days, especially now that I'm in Canada. But I'm so curious about that one that I may well get to that one this year as well. So that is the mid-year book Freakout tag for 2022. I'm just going to tag some new or new to me channels. One is the wonderful Nyambura They are back on BookTube. Their channel is 100 on Books. Man with a Hat Who Reads. Don't know that fellow's name, but he's got a hat and he reads, and I'm enjoying getting to know him and his channel. Leo Bancroft, of course. Lindy of Lindy's Magpie Reads. And the one that I have not talked about on my channel yet, because I just discovered her channel just before I left Tokyo and it's been crazy busy. Felicity at My House is a Library. You must check out all of the channels I've mentioned, but I think Felicity at My House is a Library might be the newest one. So she deserves your attention, as do all the others. So, you don't need to be tagged to do this video. If you're watching this video, I'm also tagging you, and thanks for watching.